What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bilbron Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my character build series, this time where I present to you the BladeGrappler. Yeah, another entry into my BladeSinger series, and I made a grappler out of a BladeSinger. And I gotta say, this might be the build that I am most proud of so far, because it is by far the most complicated and complex build. We end up going with 4 classes here. And it was a very difficult conceptual exercise, because grappling just isn't that great in this game. And it's kind of hard to figure out a tactical approach that can reliably make grappling a benefit. And I think I did it. I think I did it. I'm pretty proud of some of the combos that I was able to put together, the general concept and strategy that we employ. I really think it works. I think we make it work. And so, yeah, very excited to show you this build. So as a reminder, this build is in the description below. You can hit the link and it will take you to the Google Sheets where I've got everything laid out. It's much easier to check out the character there. I've got it nicely formatted and you can just kind of see all of the progressions. Everything is step by step, as I always do. Man, the DPR calculations were crazy because he has 2 different weapons. And then he has haste, and man, I was doing a lot of number crunching for this. So, anyway, please like, subscribe, comment, and check out the Patreon if you want to support the channel. And without further ado, let's check out the BladeGrappler. So before I put the setup and such on the screen, I just want to talk a little bit about the role-playing approach that I have to this character. Just with some of the things that I had to add and spells that I chose, it really suggests to me that this is a character that is grim and dark and broody and gothy and death-obsessed and all of that stuff. So I'm going to play into that and I'm going to reskin everything, to reflect tentacles and poison and darkness. You'll see how it all works. But this is definitely a different flavor of BladeSinger than any of the ones that I presented so far. And from a role-playing perspective, again, I'm really happy with this. It's so much different conceptually and plays so much differently than any of the others, and I think it's a really cool and effective style. So I put the setup on the screen, and you can see how we are setting this up. Bilbron BladeGrappler is going to be a Simic hybrid with Strength 8, Dexterity 16, Con 12, Intelligence 16, Wisdom 14, and Charisma 8. His main weapon will be the Rapier, and he will be grappling. And in Tier 1 play, he's a little boring. He is highly effective. I make sure all of the numbers work out, and he does really effective things, but not much of a departure, I think, from a typical BladeSinger. But in Tier 2+, we are going to be this kooky melee martial who grapples with fun and effective spell combos. I really think it's kind of cool. Now, normally the criticism of a melee martial that has really high defenses and from an enemy's perspective is unhittable is that those enemies may choose to try and ignore that martial and attack squishier allies, but guess what? You're grappled. So we don't play that game. You ain't slipping by us, pal. Now, don't worry, I have made sure that this build exceeds baseline DPR at all levels, and sometimes they're actually even pretty impressive. But do note that DPR numbers versus baseline are not particularly important to this build. Our battle tactics are centered around making enemies prone and grappled and other effects that zing the crap out of them. And so it will increase the party DPR in a way that is not necessarily reflected in our personal DPR numbers. We do exceed them anyway. Again, no need to worry there, but I am just saying that this character contributes more than just what these numbers might represent on a shallow analysis. Honestly, this is a very difficult character to play, I think. The way that you have to pay attention to what sort of attacks you're doing and all of that. The environment really makes a difference with this character. So in my opinion, it's going to be really fun to play and analyze battles and figure out how to approach them in an optimal way. I like that about certain builds. Now for me, this build is something of a slow burn. Our full power suite is not online until level 11, and that's something of a departure for me. I usually prefer all of my abilities to be online sooner, usually in that level 8 or 9 range. But so it goes with these complex multi-class builds. All of my builds so far have basically been straight builds with a dip, and those do tend to come online a little bit earlier. It still plays very well in Tier 1 and 2, especially in Tier 2, where we are starting to add bits and pieces to our main shtick and getting really good and innovative with it. But this is definitely more of a Tier 3 build. So I would say it's probably better for campaigns that don't start with Tier 1 PCs. I mean, if you could skip Tier 1 entirely, where you're playing pretty much as a straight BladeSinger, that would be fantastic. I had to go with Con 12, which is obviously lower than preferred. It's my first build that didn't have at least a 14 con. But this build is crazy multi-attribute dependent, and so I just had to make the sacrifice. I mean, I had to dump strength, and this is a grappler build, so definitely not my preference, but honestly, I thought so much about how to set up the stats, tried to squeeze some strength in there, I just couldn't do it. And I love the Simic hybrid for a grappler build, right? I mean, Dark Vision is always nice. And since there's lots of multi-attribute dependence on this build, that extra +1 stat, relative to the variant human or custom, is critical to getting our stats decent. So that was in part worth giving up the feat for V-human or custom. And then they get great abilities. Starting at level 1, Natural Climber is fantastic for always-on maneuverability out of the gate. Yes! And it'll have great synergy with the Bladesong +10 Move Rider when we get it. I mean, 40-foot climb as a regular always-on thing, that is just really sweet. I actually considered going with a ranged approach here because of Natural Climber being so cool at being able to access safe shooting positions, but ultimately I decided that even if I did, it would have to be a Tier 1 thing because in Tier 2 we become grapplers and grappling and range don't really work too well. So I didn't quite leverage that cool aspect of climbing, but it's still going to be super useful. And then, of course, grappling appendages is just elite for a grappler. We'll talk about all of the cool things that it offers at 5th level when we get it. And the biggest tactical issue for this build is that they are tied to strength, which we had to dump. So that was very annoying, but I do take care of that issue for us. And in terms of RP skinning, I'm going with the tentacles for this concept. Obviously, you can choose claws if you prefer and have a claw concept you want to play. And even if you're not doing a grappler build, I honestly think that glide and underwater power that the Simic hybrid can get at 5th level is really good if your campaign synergizes with them. Now, if you choose glide, you can ask the DM to rule it like the Owl Folk, that new Unearthed Arcana race in regards to falling, where they have like an opportunity to not fall. And man, if this was an underwater campaign, I would be all over this Simic hybrid. I just think this is a really great race for certain classes and certain concepts. Now, note that this build is immensely helped by a magic item that bumps strength. I do all of my builds without taking magic items into consideration, but this one is definitely worth calling out because the synergies are really, really strong. I mean, I am building a grappler here in spite of the low strength, so a Gauntlets of Ogre power would just make a massive difference. So if it's an Adventurers League campaign or a campaign where you choose your own uncommon to start, which is not unheard of in Dungeons & Dragons, this is an obvious choice. This would also unlock the use of a greatsword or a polearm at levels 1 or 2 to bump up your DPR, give you some reach. And you could consider dumping Dex instead if you get an item, and then buff your Dex to 19, and then you would have that 19 Dex right away. It would preclude you getting Dex 20 in Tier 3+, and you would be much more vulnerable to the loss or destruction of the necessary magic item. Because if you have a tanked Dex as a BladeSinger, that's just not going to work. But you can get by with a tanked Strength. But still, if it's a short campaign and you don't expect to reach Dex 20 or Tier 4 or whatever, it might make sense. But in any case, an item would really make a difference on this build, so just something to keep in mind as we go forward. I'm not going to mention it again, probably. Finally, talk to your DM about manacles. Specifically, what is required to apply them, because manacles are extremely debilitating to the enemy, and they're very difficult to escape, so if you can get manacles on them, they're pretty screwed. And the rules are somewhat ambiguous as to how you put them on a person, so just touch base with him and see what he thinks about this tactic. If you can grapple them and then, for example, apply the manacles with an interact with object, we should be all over that. We could keep the manacles in our offhand, that way we wouldn't need an interact with object to draw them, even though that could be sometimes problematic, but we'd be able to figure it out. And even if it requires your action to apply manacles to a grappled target, that could still be pretty good. So get that figured out. It's a little cheesy, but I have to point it out. You don't have to use it, guys, so your mileage may vary, but if you are the sort that wants to do this sort of thing and your DM is cool with it, I think it can be really fantastic. Alright, so now we finally can look at what we take at level 1. Our BladeSinger is again going to be starting with Fighter. I really like this Fighter dip for BladeSingers. It gets con saves, which is so good, and that fighting style, which is so good for a martial caster like the BladeSinger, and a nice starting hit point. Bank, which will be important because we only have a 12 constitution. Plus, we're going to be getting mostly wizard hit points going forward. So yeah, con saves and good hit points are just fantastic. Our fighting style will be dueling, which we're going to need as a good DPR bump just to keep our build DPR above baseline DPR, because we're going to be going with a single weapon on this build and not trying to get fancy with a shadow blade or with 2-weapon fighting or anything. And I think the fighter dip is good for role-playing when it comes to BladeSingers, because otherwise you can't start with rapier proficiency, which means you can't start with a melee martial playstyle. I mean, if you start as a level 1 wizard, you kind of have to hang back and cast spells, so the Fighter 1 dip allows a consistent role-playing playstyle that doesn't change once Bladesong comes online, and gives it a much smoother role-playing feel, in my opinion. Second Wind is always a nice combat, bonus action defensive option, and for armor we'll go with Scale Mail and Dex for an AC of 16. And our tactics are pretty simple. We attack. Don't got much else, but that will get us to level 2. And that's where we add our first level of Wizard. We pick up the 3 cantrips, 4 preps, and 2 slots. For our cantrips, we take Firebolt, Booming Blade, and Green Flame Blade. Our starting spellbook will be Find Familiar, Unseen Servant, Shield, Absorb Elements, Expeditious Retreat, and Sleep. For preps, we will take Shield, Absorb Elements, Expeditious Retreat, and Sleep. So Firebolt gives us a ranged attack roll option with good damage and can destroy objects. Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade as our main attack cantrips to bump our DPR. Green Flame Blade is preferred as we don't currently have a free disengage to enable Booming Blade. And note that the DPR figures for Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade reflect the secondary damage only. Any damage bumps to the main attack will be figured into the main attack DPR figures, and the Booming Blade Green Flame Blade riders are only if they proc. Our familiar will be the Owl for the flyby help action and the typical defensive and utility uses. We really need it here to gain advantage on our single attack to stay above the baseline DPR, and see my deep dive video on advanced familiar tactics for more information. We had Unseen Servant as a ritual as we have no available preps. We added Shield, Absorb Elements, and Expeditious Retreat as standard wizard defense spells. We're going to reskin Shield as enhanced reflexes that enable us to dodge out of all of attacks. And Absorb Elements is going to be reskinned as a temporary carapace, like the Simic Hybrid level 5 power, and they are going to be different colors depending on the energy type that it absorbs. Sleep will be our low-level big gun and our opening attack when we have slots available. It's effectively a round 1 Nova that defeats 21.5 hit points worth of enemies with no save. That's nearly 3 times the baseline DPR instantly off the board with no dice rolled, so yeah, do that. Just don't forget to make jokes about how your dancing is so good that they fall asleep. I'd like to reskin this as poison tentacles that appear around enemies' necks and choke them out. And I realize that I choose Sleep a lot just because the numbers are so good, but if you're bored with Sleep, you can take something like Tasha's Hideous Laughter or something. You can still make the same jokes. Or I guess you could add like a Blast, maybe Magic Missile or Catapult, maybe something utility like Charm Person. I mean, I think Sleep is the best, but if you take it all the time, maybe you get a little bored with it. And whatever you take, we're going to need to drop it at level 4, so Sleep is pretty elegant in that sense as well, because it gets long in the tooth, and then you can drop it and add a better spell. So we will open round 1 with Sleep when we can, and when we can't, we'll just attack. Maybe Expeditious Retreat if we need it. At level 3, we add another level of Wizard and become Bladesingers. To our spellbook, we add Mage Armor and Detect Magic. We prep Mage Armor. That'll complete our defensive suite. And we'll switch our armor to Mage Armor plus Dex plus Bladesong. And I'm going to reskin this spell as Carapace as well. And Absorb Elements will just reinforce this Carapace with an additional layer of a different color. We had Detect Magic as a ritual as we had no available preps. And Bladesong is now online. So awesome for that, although we don't currently have much use for our concentration. So not too much tactical change. We're going to open with Sleep if we can. And if we can't, we're just going to attack. Level 4 is a big level for us because we add 2nd level spells as a 3rd level wizard, and we add a couple of things that are going to be huge for us going forward. To our spellbook, we add Blur and Dragon's Breath, and we prep them both, dropping Sleep. So I love Blur. This is my first option. It is an elite defensive option. Blur plus high AC plus shield just renders you almost unhittable, and you can methodically chop down creatures over several rounds as they just keep missing and missing and missing. Our DPR, even with blur, is still right around baseline, with our familiar providing the attack at advantage. And it's above baseline if we can get the secondary effects of Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade to proc. And frankly, that's good enough for me when added to being unhittable, which to me is just one of the best feelings ever. So for me, this is my first option against hard hitters and against a lot of enemies. And I'm going to reskin this blur as magical tentacles that just grow from my sides and they deflect attacks. Kind of similar to the ones that I'm going to be getting at next level, but accomplishing the whole blur defensive thing. And then adding Dragon's Breath is an elite offensive option. It is a very strong DPR boost with a small area of effect. The numbers in the column represent the DPR when it hits 2 creatures, which save 40% of the time, which works out to about 8.4 DPR per creature, which is excellent if we can get 2 or more creatures in the AoE. We could potentially get up to 6 to 8 creatures, depending on how your DM rules cones, and even just getting 1 creature is adding better than baseline DPR if you add it to our base rapier damage. Although do note that this is somewhat offset by losing our familiar's help action on the attack, so we wouldn't be getting it at advantage, but the numbers still work. So for me, Dragon's Breath would be the first option versus a small number of enemies. I generally think the defensive tactics make more sense, but, be situationally opportunistic. And keep in mind that this tactic means your familiar is at risk, so take advantage of its 60-foot fly speed and cover. Because you're in melee, it's pretty ideal to just operate from the backpack. That gives it an ability to squirt out 30 feet and come back, blast out that Dragon's Breath for you, and it's mostly safe. Enemies would have to ready an action to pick off the familiar, but if you see them holding your attack, you can just keep the familiar in your pack and then they waste their action. That does sacrifice the Dragon's Breath damage, but at least it's something and your familiar doesn't die, so that's good. I did consider Shadow Blade here as an offensive option instead of Dragon's Breath, but the DPR is inferior to Dragon's Breath for several levels. Plus, we're going to be dropping Dragon's Breath later, and committing to Shadow Blade makes it hard to go with different concentration spells later as you level. And again, I just think we should go defensive here anyway. I mean, Blur plus high AC plus shield is just so good. And our DPR is fine, so I'm not too keen on the offensive options, but I'm just putting it out there because sometimes you need it, and sometimes people prefer it. And for the math geeks, note that our DPR dips here because the target AC went up and our attack bonus didn't, so there you go. So if we go defensive, round 1 will be Blur plus Blade Song, and round 2 will be attack. And if we go offensive, then our first round will be to attack and Blade Song, and then attack and Dragon's Breath. You can opt for the Dragon's Breath first if you don't think your concentration is at risk and you want to get some offense out on round 1. Level 5 is a huge level for us. We add a level of Monk, we get our first feat, and we get some racial abilities. So Grappling Appendage's Tentacles is now online, and we are now starting to move towards grappling tactics. That's our thing, and now we're starting to go down that path. We can grapple up to 2 creatures with both our hands remaining free, and we can grapple up to 3 with our appear in hand. The tentacle gives us a bonus action grapple if we hit with it, and the tentacle is normally tied to strength, which does not work for us, which is why we had to take Monk here to get martial arts. It's the only mechanic in the game that applies dex to natural weapons and unarmed strikes, and that hurts, because that's literally all it's adding here. And I agonized over this because I just didn't want to take a dip just to fix the tentacle, but I can see no way of avoiding biting this bullet. Not taking Monk 1 here just leaves the tentacle too weak to depend on as our preferred strategy, so yeah, we're gonna do it. And as a reminder, if you have Gauntlets of Ogre Power, that makes this Monk dip unnecessary, so you can skip it and go right to the next level in terms of development, but we can't depend on having Gauntlets of Ogre Power, so we're going to take the Monk dip to fix that. The martial arts will apply the dex of +3 instead of -1, so that +4 bump is just too big. I need it. That unlocks the tentacle attack, that unlocks the bonus action grapple of the tentacle attack, and the martial arts does give us a bonus action attack option with the tentacle as well. Now the problem is you can't use Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade with the tentacle. So it's currently suboptimal DPR to use the tentacle. We're still going to mostly be using the rapier, but we are going to be fixing that going forward. For our feat, we add Skill Expert to get Athletics Expertise and Intelligence +1. Because we dumped strength, we need that expertise so that we can become respectable at grappling. Otherwise, we'd be attacking at a +2 right now, and that's just not good. Okay, see, we are officially now becoming grapplers and building around this concept. So first note that low strength doesn't affect your ability to move with a grappled creature. I put a couple of rulings up on the screen so that you can show that that's how it's supposed to work. And we're still not great at this, but we're off to a solid start, and we'll get there. We currently have a strong base, in my opinion, for a grappler that has no basic mechanical holes. We've got a bonus action grapple and a bonus action attack that were going to be nice options for us going forward. We've got an elite defense with blur as our concentration and decent offense, despite having multi-attribute dependency and dumping our strength, and not even counting the grappling benefits to the party because we're going to be creating grappled and prone conditions and helping out in that way. We also have an elite offensive option in Dragon's Breath, which can double our DPR to double baseline under the average expected conditions at the cost of our defenses and foregoing blur. But we can get even better than that if we maximize the number of creatures in the AoE. And with grapple, we can possibly keep 3 creatures grappled and in the Dragon's Breath AoE, so really nice damage boost if we can pull that off. But do discuss with your DM if you can avoid the Dragon's Breath damage if you are attacking grappled enemies while you are grappling them. It seems to me that you can, if you're wrestling somebody, you can stick their head out or whatever, or their torso out, and not grab that part, and then your familiar can roast it. But ask the DM, it's up to him. And unfortunately, the monk's unarmored defense does nothing for us, as it doesn't stack with mage armor, which is so bad. I mean, would it really kill bounded accuracy to give my BladeSinger a +2 bump on his AC here? I don't think so. I would really like to do that, but unfortunately we can't. And note that we currently have some bonus action clog if we go the offensive route, even though it will clear up eventually. But that's one of the reasons that I advocate and would personally play a defensive style with this character and use my concentration on blur. It clears up the bonus action clog. The problem being that Bladesong and Dragon's Breath are both bonus action spells. Shadow Blade 2 for that matter, if you were thinking about doing that. So round 1 will always be Bladesong, and then round 2, if we go offensive, will currently be Dragon's Breath, and it won't be until round 3 or later that we have the option of using our bonus action grapple or attack, and by then the battle's half over. So a little cloggy, and we will be dropping Dragon's Breath in a few levels. And again, be aware that we need to lead with the tentacle and attack with it if we are going to trigger the bonus action grapple or attack, and we can't use Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade with it, so at this level we're going to have to pick which one. And you can see my suggested rounds 1, 2, and 3 as plan A for defensive and offensive approaches. At level 6 we go back to adding wizard levels and get Wizard 4. To our spellbook we add Maximilian's Earthen Grasp and Enlarge Reduce. We prep them both and drop Expeditious Retreat. And now we have our new grapple combo online. This is all about grappling your opponent and dragging them to or holding them in a persistent AoE spell to force continuous damage or effects. This will be our primary tactic going forward. We're all about creating a nasty AoE and dragging people into it and preventing them from getting out. We're going to be starting with Maximilian's Earthen Grasp as our only persistent AoE, but we will be adding many more as we level. And remember, we can grapple up to 3 creatures with this tactic and still have our rapier in hand. I like Maximilian's Earthen Grasp as our first control option for the grapple combo. I mean, it's just got great RP synergy. We are going to reskin it to look like a tentacle, and then we can use it to keep one guy restrained, and then we'll go off and grapple more people. Can always drag them back to the tentacle if anybody escapes it. So I think this spell is quite thematic and works nicely with our tactics. And then I added Enlarge Reduce to give us an offensive and grappling buff, because we will get advantage on grapple checks, which is very nice for this concept. The increased size means that we can grapple bigger creatures. And the spell has some nice utility uses, so pretty solid add, I think. And ask your DM if you can use an oversized rapier for twice the base weapon damage. If so, you can carry one around and then get an even bigger DPR bump than reflected in the column, and that would be really cool. Again, my suggested plan A for defense and offensive approaches are at the bottom. And then we move into level 7 where we add a 5th level of Wizard. Another big one for us because we add Mind Sliver as our cantrip, Haste and Stinking Cloud to our spellbook, prepping them both and dropping Dragon's Breath. Of course, Mind Sliver is an awesome cantrip, strong range save option with an elite debuff. Haste as an elite BladeSinger option gives us the move and AC bumps plus the haste attack. This is now our go-to over Blur because we get half the defensive bump that Blur gives us anyway, plus the offensive and maneuverability bumps. But we will keep Blur as our backup because we only have a couple of 3rd level slots, and when we run out, we will want to have Blur in our back pocket. And Haste is particularly good for us because we have 2 different weapons, one of which cannot use Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade. So this is going to allow us to use our rapier and get Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade, and use our tentacle, unlocking the bonus action attack or grapple all in the same round. Before we couldn't do that, and now with haste we can. So very big add for our build here. Then I added Stinking Cloud as our next grappling combo. Again, we're just going to grapple an enemy and keep them in or drag them to the AoE. Now, we personally might want to carry around some antitoxin in case we have to enter the AoE. We'll try not to, but you never know what might happen. And do note that Stinking Cloud does also offer the defenses of Heavy Obscurement if you need it. That'll take sight spells off the table and prevent attacks at advantage from being leveraged against you. So check out my deep dive video on Heavy Obscurement for more information about that. And now that we're dropping Dragon's Breath, because we've got Haste and Stinking Cloud, that's going to clear up a lot of our bonus action clog. Our plan A cleans up a little bit because we're going with haste for the most part, but you can still see my suggestions at the bottom. Level 8's another big level for us. We add a 6th level of Wizard and extra attack. So to our spellbook, we add Phantom Steed and Animate Dead, and we prep Animate Dead. We added Phantom Steed as a ritual as we had no available preps, but one of my favorite spells, as I'm sure you folks know by now, Elite Maneuverability at no cost, so always into that. And then we added Animate Dead as excellent support for grappling or web. I typically go Tiny Servant here, but Animate Dead is also really good and it fits the character a lot better. It's a strong, always-on combat and utility option. It has no impact on our own action economy because they have their own actions, so we can give them standing orders to attack anyone that I verbally command or who attacks me, and I won't need to use my bonus action to command them. And they offer a solid DPR bump, especially once your enemy is prone or restrained, and then they can attack at advantage. Their poison immunity combos nicely with Stinking Cloud. The spell has a 24-hour duration, which means you can always long rest trick it and still have the slot available in case you need it. And we are currently going to just operate with the 1 skeleton, but at next level we're going to start upcasting it for 3. And do note that if you have taken a day off from casting, you can operate with 3 of them by long rest tricking, right? If you have a day off from casting, just cast all of your spell slots as Animated Dead right before a long rest, and then you're going to get the slots back and your undead will still have 16 hours of duration left. And of course, the extra attack is a huge add to this build. Not only does it increase my DPR, but we can now use both of our weapon options to get the Rapier plus Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade, and your Tentacle attack in the same round, even without using haste. So that's really, really nice for this build. And again, for the math geeks, our DPR dipped here as the target AC increased and we didn't get an attack bump, but the extra attack that we get increases our overall DPR anyway, so it's all good. No real change to our plan A's. At level 9, we throw in a curveball and take a level of Death Cleric. This is going to get us Reaper for Sapping Sting. We also get 3 cantrips and 3 preps, and our spell slots bump. So for cantrips, we are adding the Reaper version of Sapping Sting, which remember is better than a regular cantrip because you can affect 2 creatures which are adjacent to each other. And for Cleric, we had Guidance, Mending, and Sacred Flame. For our preps, we get False Life, Ray of Sickness, Sanctuary, Healing Word, and Command. And Reaper is why we took this level. Sapping Sting is an Amazeballs cantrip to combo with extra attack. It's normally only available to Dunamancer's, but we can acquire it through Reaper. And again, it will affect 2 enemies if they're adjacent. So we can use this opportunistically to help allies because we can make enemies adjacent so that we can affect 2 of them because we're grapplers, right? The tactic is going to be to use our first attack to hit them with a tentacle, which will proc our bonus action grapple. And now that they're grappled, we'll move our enemy next to enemy 2, and then with our extra attack, Sapping Sting them both. Now my enemy is grappled and prone, and my ally's enemy is prone. So I love this combo. I think it's really sweet. Note that with Bladesong, we have 20 feet of movement when we're grappling, so we can move people around and set this up. And this tactic is always on, always available, even on the 10th battle of the day or the 20th battle of the day. Really fantastic add in my opinion, and only the BladeSinger can pull this off because they're the only ones whose extra attack can include a cantrip. Needless to say, if you are a melee martial, being able to prone 2 enemies is awesome, and then being able to grapple those enemies and keep them prone is super awesome. So that's what we do. We're Blade Grapplers, baby. As far as our Cleric cantrips, Guidance is self-explanatory, one of the best cantrips in the game. Mending is one of the best utility cantrips in the game. Sacred Flame to give us a ranged attack option that can affect enemies behind cover. False Life and Ray of Sickness came with the domain, but we're never going to use them. Sanctuary to protect the familiar if we are using Dragon's Breath. I mean, I dropped it, but you don't have to. And if you keep it, Sanctuary is a nice way to keep that familiar protected. Healing Word is an excellent ranged bonus action heal. Command can proc opportunity attacks as needed, which is actually quite excellent if you're rolling out a bunch of skeletons and such. And we are now upcasting Animate Dead with our Dead 4th level slot to get 3 skeletons. And note that we can operate with 6 of them and our slot if we are long rest tricking after a day off from casting. At level 10, we are going back to adding fighter levels, and we add Action Surge. Action Surge is a fantastic add for a martial caster. We can Nova, or we can add a spell to our normal attack routine once per short rest. Yeah. So a mechanically simple but pretty exciting level, I think. Action Surge on a caster is just so sweet to add. Level 11 is a big level for us because we add Fighter 3 to become Rune Knights, and now our base power suite is finally complete with Giant's Might and Rune Carver. Giant's Might is obviously an amazing add for a grappler build. Our grapple checks are now at advantage, even without Enlarge Reduce. At large size, we can now grapple up to huge creatures. If we throw in Enlarge Reduce on top of that, we can grapple any creature in the game. The DPR bump never hurts, but the downside is that it will cause bonus action clog, so we have to manage it. We've already got Blade Song, which is a bonus action, and now we have Giant's Might, which is a bonus action. And this is why we can't run this build with another bonus action tactic. Remember, spells like Shadow Blade, Dragon's Breath, and Spirit Shroud, which are popular BladeSinger options, don't really work here because of the clog. We've got to go with Haste and Blur and Persistent AoE as our main thing because we've already got to juggle Blade Song and Giant's Might. And again, ask your DM if you can use oversized weapons and get a rapier that'll do 3 times the base weapon damage. It never hurts to ask, you could get a free DPR bump. As far as Rune Carver, I'm going to add the Stone Rune to give us enhanced dark vision and an elite save or suck option. What makes this so good is that it's invoked on a reaction. So amazing action economy here. We can do everything we normally do and throw in the Stone Rune on top of it. So super good. And then for the second rune, I took the Cloud Rune because it's an amazing defense to offense option versus criticals. I mean, it's going to be so fun for them to critical me or an ally, and I just invoke the Cloud Rune, and now they've critical another enemy. Oh, so sweet. But I will say that you could opt for the Fire Rune here, because that is probably more thematic with the shackles and the restraining and such, us being grapplers and all. So it's a strong offensive control option. I'm defensive minded, and the Cloud Rune is so good to me, so I decided to go with it. But if you take the Fire Rune, that totally makes sense too. So now that we've added Giant's Might, I've revised my suggested plan A for rounds 1, 2, and 3. You can see that in rounds 1, it's Blade Song, and rounds 2, it's Giant's Might for our bonus action. And then in round 3, we start using our bonus action attack or grapple. But we've got haste attack, we've got extra attack, so we've got a lot of things that we can do even with the bonus action clog in rounds 1 and 2. At level 12, we add another level of wizard and get 4th level spells. To our spellbook, we add Everard's Black Tentacles and Fire Shield, and prep them both, dropping Maximilian's Earthen Grasp. Everard's Black Tentacles, of course, is perfectly thematic and a great offense and control option that can replace Maximilian's Earthen Grasp. Does pretty much the same thing, but better. And of course, we'll grapple combo with this and drag people into the AoE or hold them into the AoE until they stop moving. Well, Fire Shield again as an excellent no concentration defensive option for a melee martial caster. The retribution damage will go off frequently if you're in melee, and the 10-minute concentration means we can be aggressive in terms of free-casting it. No change to my suggested plan A's, except that we have Everard's Black Tentacles as an option now. At level 13, we add another level of Wizard. To our spellbook, we add Gift of Alacrity and Misty Step, because we are picking up another feat here, Fey Touched. And for our level, we'll add Sickening Radiance and Wall of Fire. And we are going to prep all of these spells, which we can do because Fey Touched bumps our intelligence, and we now have an 18 intelligence. So adding 4 spells to our preps is really awesome. And don't forget, we can do Gift of Alacrity and Misty Step once per day for free. So yeah. I did consider Piercer here to get a +1 on Dex, but frankly, I would rather have the extra spells and slots and higher save DC than a little bit of extra DPR. But it is an option if you prefer offense, because having that Dex 18 is really nice. Misty Step is a welcome add as an elite bonus action teleport for maneuverability and escape. Gift of Alacrity is awesome for that always welcome initiative bump. And Sickening Radiance and Wall of Fire are both just great persistent AoE options for our grapple combo. Blur for us is now more of a panic button than a go-to because we've got these powerful offensive concentration spells online now. So we are going to love throwing up a Sickening Radiance or whatever and just dragging people into it and potentially holding 3 enemies in the area of effect and them just not being able to get out and eating that damage round after round. We now pass all standard concentration checks with a +9 on our roll, and we are now upcasting Animate Dead with our Dead 5th level slot to get 5 skeletons. We can operate with 17 of them and our slot if we long rest Trick after a day off from casting. I get that bones will be an issue, but I think we can figure it out. And I know that 17 skeletons is getting a little crazy. It gets even crazier as we level. And what can I say? I mean, it's totally rational given the rules, so I have to point it out. And you do kind of need massive numbers to be effective because their attack bonus is really low and the target AC of the baseline is going up all the time. But ignore it and dial it back some if you think it's cheesy or you think it's going to drive your DM crazy to be rolling out a lot of skeletons and stuff. I'm just pointing out that you can do it, and there's no reason not to do it if you're trying to bring as much force as possible to the point of attack. At level 14, we gain 9th level Wizard. To our spellbook, we add Transmute Rock and Contact Other Plane. Prepping Transmute Rock. It's just a nasty no concentration control option. Another cool persistent AoE for our grapple combo. But because it's no concentration, we can combo it with other persistent AoE concentration spells, like Sickening Radiance or Wall of Fire or Cloud Kill or Everett's Black Tentacles. Man, Transmute Rock is good when you combine it with one of those. We're going to reskin it as a Field of Tentacles that looks a lot like Everett's Black Tentacles, but just has the effect of Transmute Rock. And then I added Contact Other Plane because we needed a ritual as we had no available preps. At level 15, we add Wizard 10 and Song of Defense comes online. We get a new cantrip, so we add Lightning Lure. To our spellbook, we add Cloud Kill and Rary's Telepathic Bond, and we prep Cloud Kill. Lightning Lure is an interesting add to give us that pull effect to extend our melee range if we need to. We can combo it with extra attack as an opener to bring an enemy into melee range. Cloud Kill as another great persistent AoE for the grapple combo. Has synergy with Undead's poison immunity and role-playing synergy for our concept. Rary's Telepathic Bond as a ritual as we had no available preps. And we are now upcasting Animate Dead with our Dead 6th level slot for 7 skeletons. And we can operate with 29 skeletons and our slot if we long rest Trick after a day off from casting. Song of Defense is online, and that's always nice to help manage our hit points and concentration. At level 16, we add another level of Wizard and access 6th level spells. To our spellbook, we add Contingency and Wall of Ice. To our preps, we add Wall of Ice. Our Contingency will be a Fire Shield on a gesture or command word, and Wall of Ice because it's a wall, and it's a blast, and it's a persistent AoE for the grapple combo all in one. I love spells like that. At level 17, we gain Wizard 12 and another feat. To our spellbook, we add Tasha's Otherworldly Guise and Soul Cage, prepping them both and dropping Wall of Fire. I love Tasha's Otherworldly Guise if I need a fly speed or immunities. It's just so versatile and useful, so it's a pretty common one for me to choose. I love Soul Cage as another elite reaction that offers intel and healing and advantage and scrying options, plus good role-playing synergy with his sinister personality. So we can drop Wall of Fire now that we have Wall of Ice, which is better. You could choose to drop Fire Shield instead, as it's now in our contingency. I just chose not to because I don't really like the redundancies that Wall of Fire has with Wall of Ice. And if we drop Fire Shield, it would just be annoying to set up our contingency, and it would just be available more often for us to precast. We are now upcasting Animate Dead with our Dead 7th level slot for 9 skeletons on the regular, and we can operate up to 38 skeletons plus our slot if we long rest Trick after a day off of casting. At level 18, we add a 13th level of Wizard for 7th level spells. To our book, we add Force Cage and Simulacrum, and we prep Force Cage. I do this with every build. They're both self-explanatory. They're head and shoulders better than any other 7th level spell option. I don't think the gap is very close, but we will reskin Force Cage as Force Tentacles. At level 19, we add a 14th level of Wizard, and Song of Victory comes online. To our spellbook, we add Create Magian and Whirlwind, and we prep Whirlwind. We're going to use Create Magian for a Galvan Magian as a powerful assistant or pet. I personally don't care about the hit point loss, but, if you do, pick something else, no big deal. And I'm going to reskin the Magan as something Lovecraftian with tentacles, of course. That'll be a cool visual. I picked up Whirlwind as our latest nasty persistent AoE for the grapple combo. And we are now upcasting Animate Dead with our Dead 8th level slot for 11 skeletons on the regular. And we can operate with up to 49 of them, plus our slot, if we are long rest tricking after a day off from casting. Song of Victory is always awesome to add because it bumps our DPR, and that's what we like to do. We finally make it to level 20. We get a 15th level of Wizard. To our spellbook, we add Clone and Maddening Darkness as our capstone 8th level spells. We prep Maddening Darkness. Clone is our Immortality capstone. Maddening Darkness is our capstone Persistent AoE for the grapple combo. It's awesome to add psychic damage to our menu of options, which is already including Radiant, Cold, Poison, and Bludgeoning. And nice role-playing synergy in my opinion because of our sinister personality and concept. Now we're no longer using a daily spell slot on skeletons. I just wanted to reserve the 8th level slot for Maddening Darkness. So we're just going to roll with the ones that I cast from whatever leftover spell slots we have from the previous day, which is a maximum of 49 if we don't do any spell casting at all the day before that. So that's it. That is the BladeGrappler. Very long video. It was very complicated and we had a lot to go over. But let me know what you think. I think that worked. It seemed pretty powerful and cool and effective and was never dragging in DPR and has a lot of cool stuff that only it can do and would be a really cool ally to have because it's just grappling and proning all the time. So, that's really cool for your ally to do. I like it. I think it's got a really cool feel and mechanically it came together very nicely. Even though it was very complex and I had to go through a bajillion iterations and tons of DPR calculations. I'm pretty proud of this build. I like it. I think it'll be a lot of fun to play. And who knows, my campaign is ending here in a couple of weeks, so maybe I'll choose this one for my next campaign. Regardless, let me know in the comments what you think. And thank you so much for watching. This has been the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bilbron Stone. See you next time.